you to use the hashtag BLRAS or other Twitter handles posted on the slides. We are recording a copy of the presentation and we'll be sure to send you the video as well as a copy of the slides within the next few business days. Today's presenter is Bluelock Chief Technology Officer Pat O'Day, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pat to kick it off.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. Hey, everybody. Hope your day is going well so far, and we appreciate the fact that you were able to escape from firefighting long enough to try and learn a little bit about disaster recovery with us. So one of the things that we wanted to try to share were basically the feedback that we've gotten from a lot of IT organizations that we've talked to about what their top challenges and also opportunities are going into 2015 and really the next couple of years, and what some of the constraints are that they're facing. And hopefully you'll identify with some of these, because our intent is to provide you a path forward, not necessarily just get you even more stressed than you might already be about these issues. But one of the things that we're seeing is that data centers continue and budgets, everything continues to be constrained, and at the same time the business continues to ask more out of IT. Gartner has a great paper out called Taming the Digital Dragon, and it talks about IT as being forced to serve in two completely incompatible capacities right now. The business is asking you to support their innovation, whether it's mobile devices, software applications, automation, all those things, but at the same time they want you to stay entirely focused on change management, risk reduction, and reducing cost. And those things generally don't work well together. One of the statistics that's in the paper, it actually predicts that, and this is based on data from CEOs and CIOs that they surveyed, that the majority of the applications that are in the data center today, about 50% of those headed towards 75% of those will not be in the customer-owned data center in the next 3 to 4 years. So, and this is more due to the phenomena of people adopting, a hosted CRM application like Salesforce versus running it in their own data center. But what that does is it really puts additional pressure on IT budgets, because why would you go and add a generator or update your HVAC or even maybe your storage array if you knew that applications were ending up in SaaS and not necessarily in your data center. But the data centers need to keep running and be strong and effective and get modernized. So that's a challenge. One of the other pieces of information that they point out is that globally, IT budgets are only expected to increase by 0.2%. And how in the world are you going to accomplish all these new things that the business wants to do with the same money that you had 2 or 3 years ago, assuming your budget has stayed flat through the recession? That's a challenge. Let's say, for example, you did have an opportunity to reinvigorate your IT and really support the business. Not only is budget a constraint, but assuming that you can manage that effectively, finding and retaining IT talent, especially those that have this more modern skill sets to support all these new things that are going on, whether it's cloud, mobile, automation, et cetera, is a challenge. And then what exactly do you have those folks focus on? Because one of the things we're seeing is that oftentimes those, you might have the people, you might have the funding, but an obvious cloud strategy is lacking. And someone was joking with me the other day. They talked about how many vendors call them on the phone and ask them what their cloud strategy is, and they're really just sick of the whole topic, much less trying to make any progress on it. So that's a challenge. One of the challenges, if you do have a cloud strategy, it really forces your application set into two different worlds, where you've got a modern set of applications. They might be new, they might be fairly recent, already virtualized, maybe even running in a cloud already. So they're sort of set up to be successful regardless of what your cloud strategy might be. But you also have a set of legacy applications. It could just be things that have, still based on x86 that haven't really been updated, and there's an opportunity, there's a path that you might already understand. Maybe you're 35% virtualized and you can get to 60 or 70%. You just have to go forward and do it. But there are also a lot of applications, whether it's an AIX host, AS400, a mainframe, maybe a really large Oracle database that mission critical and a lot harder, not obvious on how to modernize that so it can take advantage of more modern capabilities that cloud might bring to you. And then if you do get those applications modernized, it's not just moving the application or modernizing the application itself. You have to do all the things, call it the meta services or capabilities that surround the application, like backup, disaster recovery, security, things like that. It all sort of goes together in one package. And if you sort of take all the things on the right about what you want to do, and you look at the things on the left and say, man, those are my constraints, it's a challenging time. I think it's an exciting time because I tend to thrive on innovation and change in the industry, but I also know it can be a little overwhelming. We're having a little issue with, I think the slides are updating slower on your screen than on mine, so if my dialogue's not in parity with what you're seeing, that's why. So I'll try to manage that as best I can. So those are your challenges, those are your opportunities, and you've got a lot of choices. So if you decide to move forward with a cloud strategy, one of the most common ways that we see, very traditional approach, is to do it yourself. Doing it yourself doesn't mean you're entirely alone. You probably have a relationship with a value-added reseller or a partner. It may be a very transactional relationship where you just tell them what components you need, you get pricing, and you have it brought in. You may use their professional services, consulting, maybe even some architecture, things like that. That works pretty well, and certainly it's a proven model. One of the challenges with that, though, is that that relationship is very tactical and transactional. They'll come in, get you set up, get you upgraded, and then it's really up to you to own and operate the environment, which, according to most data I've read, the majority of the work and the effort and the focus is on operating the environment, not on getting it installed. Some people, 10 years ago, if you were a manufacturing company and you had an e-commerce application, supporting your manufacturing business was fairly different from supporting your e-commerce business. The security requirements were a lot higher around e-commerce. It was typically needed a lot better internet access than most companies could deliver from within their building in terms of latency and throughput. So a lot of folks would outsource that to a managed hosting provider, that one application, but keep all the core business applications within their data center. And that model still exists. What was really great about it is you could get access to these highly leveraged assets, quadruple generators, multiple internet feeds, all these things that might have been luxuries for your data center. And you're sharing those assets with other people, so you're not paying the full cost. And there's usually bench strength there. So if you look at someone who understands BGP routing for redundant internet connections, most managed hosting providers have multiple people that can do that, and you may be limited in your network staff to someone who can keep the phone system up and running and core switching and whatnot. So it's a pretty good model. There's also probably what certainly the media and others are telling you to do, and the hype, and that is to drop whatever you're doing and run out into a mega cloud. There are certainly some really, I would say, never seen before benefits that mega clouds deliver in terms of the speed at which you can start using a cloud. You swipe your credit card. I used to use that as my example, and I noticed a while back that because I have an Amazon account just for shopping, that I can use my Amazon account to go provision a server, and that's pretty cool. So I don't even have to swipe the credit card because I've already got an account. Off I can go. For all practical purposes, there's really no capacity limits in the mega clouds. You can get, 100, 1,000 instances of computing horsepower, process a really complex calculation, get a result, and turn it all off 2 days later. Pretty cool. What we're hearing, though, is that those environments are radically different from the data center that most people are used to operating or trained on and have built their expertise on, so that as easy it is to get started, it is much harder to master those architectures and those environments. The other challenges we're hearing is that it's also very tough to keep control of the data and the security. Not that you can't deploy similar security technology in a mega cloud that you would have in your own data center, but things like auditing. Where is the data? There's a movie that came out a while ago where a couple lost a video in the cloud and they couldn't find it, and they actually show them inside of a data center just ripping wires randomly out trying to figure out where this video is. And that's a big challenge, particularly in the post-Snowden area where data leakage and control is a real issue. Not only that, there are lots of choices within each one of those categories, so we think it's really important to work with someone who has a proven track record, regardless of which path you choose. Gartner has recently recognized Bluelock as a leader in recovery as a service, which is the topic for today. So hopefully that'll come through in all the material that I'm about to share with you. So when we talk specifically about disaster recovery in a modern era, I wanted to share with you the challenges that still exist. So I showed you all these issues and choices that you have, but even with those capabilities, and if you can manage those risks, here are the things that we've learned in the field are still the biggest challenges for people to move into this new world. So the risk is real and it's growing. I'll show some statistics around that. Traditional methods are not effective for modern businesses and applications, so we'll walk through some specific examples of some things you probably have in place today. And my guess is you already know that under certain circumstances, those won't achieve a result that you'll be proud of and that you'll be able to explain to the business and have them be satisfied. Part of that has nothing to do with IT. It's hard to take IT disaster risk and actually have a meaningful conversation with the business because you're still forced to put a lot of technological terminology and concepts into the business for them to really understand the risk. And they're focused on whatever they're doing in their world, and I feel oftentimes when I talk to business folks that I'm landing from a spaceship or from the future, and I'm here to help, and it's just kind of tough to explain teleportation to someone who spent all day just commuting in a car to work, and then it's real and you can use it now. Prioritization is still tough. Disaster recovery feels like insurance. It's a necessary evil. It's not a critical project. A friend of mine explains this as he says there are projects that IT can accomplish where the grade you would get from the business would be an A or a B. So no matter how well you executed, if you lit up 30 new locations or turned on a new facility or fired up an application that allowed everybody to perform their job twice as good, even if you were a little late in delivering it, maybe a little over budget, you're still going to get an A or B because the business impact was so powerful. And then there are what he calls C to F projects, where no matter how awesome you do, the best grade you could possibly get would be a C because they just expect this stuff to work. So you go and upgrade the internet, you upgrade your storage, you upgrade your VMware environments, you upgrade an application. That stuff should just happen. IT should be good at that. Best thing they're going to give you is a C. And if it even goes slightly wrong, you're going to get a D or an F. So DR really fits in most cases into that C to F category because the business thinks you've probably already got it and everything should be fine. So prioritizing that over getting a mobile application up and running, expanding the business, adding new locations is really tough to do relative to what we call KTLO, which is keeping the lights on. So in terms of disasters getting worse and being on the rise. I look at CNN, Google News, et cetera, every day, and it seems like there's a lot of bad news out there. It's very easy to blame the media for that. But what we're seeing statistically is that there are a lot more issues than there have been in the past. So if you look at the FEMA statistics, and FEMA hasn't been around for 60 years, but what they did is they included all the instances where government support or funding had to be issued in order to support a community during a disaster event. So that's what it's tracking here. And you can see that over the last 60 years, there were only 10 or so, 5 to 10 of those instances, and now we peaked at around 250 in 2010. Part of that is I think there are just more people in more areas, so those cornfields or those prairies that used to just have crops or even just wild area now have homes, suburbs, etc. Suburbs usually have businesses and work environments. Those work environments tend to have technology. So you look at the sort of the roll-up effect of just expansion, that tornado or flood event that might have occurred and not really impacted business or human beings is now a tremendous impact. The other issue is that technology is essential to businesses today. So a technological impact where 10 years ago email may have been an inconvenience, you'll just email someone back tomorrow instead of today. It could make a difference between whether or not you receive an order or what customers perceive of your customer service capability. So there's sort of much more of a real-time impact for these things today than there has been. I put some statistics together just to draw out the color around the types of incidents that were occurring across the country. I have this for all 50 states and even beyond. So this is an attempt at kind of a cross-section. What you'll see is certainly kind of in the Midwest, sort of the East Midwest area here, we worry a lot about floods, hails, basically things that involve water, or regardless of whether it's liquid or frozen. And then that water is usually delivered very aggressively through high wind, thunderstorms, hurricanes, things like that, tornadoes, etc. And then in the winter, we get the same dose of everything, but in the form of ice. And if you've ever seen, most of you may not know, but the air conditioner that you see in your data center is only half of the system. The other half of the system is outside in the form of what's called a condenser. And the condenser has a giant fan, just like the one you have at home. And ice will freeze that puppy up, and guess what? No cool air in your data center, so pretty nasty. And then you go further south and west, and they add additional challenges like drought, which causes a lot of dust to come in the air and clog up air. It also, if you don't have water to feed into your air conditioning units, that's a problem. Keep everything cool. Tropical storms, earthquakes, and the Northeast has an additional threat of volcanoes, which whether it's throwing ash into the air or disrupting power in communities or mudslides, everybody's got problems. Apparently, except mostly for Vegas. So for those of you not familiar with Bluelock, we have 2 data centers. We take an East Coast, West Coast approach to make sure we have really healthy diversity. And we also put the facilities far enough inland that we wouldn't be affected by coastal events. So we have a facility, a data center in Vegas and one in Indianapolis. And you can see that the risk of all those water-based events in Vegas is low, if almost zero. And then when you think about earthquakes and volcanoes and things, so far Indianapolis is not famous for any of those. So nice set of diversity, and depending on what your risk is, we can offset it pretty well. So that all being said, statistically, the biggest issue is still us, human beings. This could be intentional. You've got malicious users on the outside of your firewall that might try to get in and cause corruption through a phishing attack or breaking, through an open vulnerability or a hole that wasn't patched in an application. Got former employees. There are all kinds of opportunities for humans, malicious humans, to cause trouble. And then there are well-intentioned human beings that simply missed something. So whether it's a software update that your developers are rolling out, that corrupts the application or the database. Could be a patch or an update you receive from a vendor that maybe you didn't have time to test as effectively, or maybe your testing environment, your production environment aren't as identical as you would like. So you did test it, but yet production was different enough that it failed. That's really the biggest issue. And then DR today, it's not really that good. So statistically, what we've seen in the different reports and conversations that we have access to is that a lot of people don't have a good DR plan, or survey says when they ask, they don't feel real confident about the plan itself. And then there's a lot of people that have tried their plan, and they thought it was good, or they believed it was pretty close, and the majority of those didn't actually work. It didn't satisfy what the business said they needed in times of an event. A lot of people don't test their plan, and those that do test don't test it that often. And that's, again, back to prioritization. It takes a lot of resources in a traditional approach to test your DR environment. The other issue is, when you go to do tests, the tests don't work. A lot of times documentation changes. The person that used to know that system has moved on, so when you go to run the test, it doesn't work. Maybe the updates aren't sent out there anymore. All kinds of problems with DR, even if you have it. So let's dig a little bit deeper into some of those approaches. So I've got 4 here. These are the most common ones that we see, and we'll talk about the challenges with each one. And then I'm not going to leave you hanging. I will give you an example of some companies that have actually gone and addressed these things in what I would consider a more modern DR approach. So tape-based backup, a classic, an old favorite, maybe not a favorite depending on if you're the person who actually has to manage the tapes or not. A lot of people have evolved beyond tape or only use it for archival, but either way, the model's essentially the same. You got a primary location. Those little blue boxes are meant to indicate different applications of different sizes or importance. You back them all up on the tape probably every 24 hours, and then you use some kind of cold site that could be handing the tape to the system administrator who drives it home in his car every night. I still see that happening. Some people just place it on top of the cabinet and think that as long as it's not near the tape drive, it should be fine. A lot of people today use a company like Iron Mountain, who might have a vault somewhere in your metro area, and they come every day or every week and pick up the tape and take it out there. That case, that's pretty good if there's a fire or something. The challenge is recovery is an absolute nightmare with that approach. So the good news is you do have your data as long as the tape worked. And that is really important, data protection, but recovery is a whole different animal. If you have a cold site to recover at, it may not have power, cooling, and space for equipment. If you're working with a vendor like SunGuard that actually will supply the equipment, they drop off all these boxes of gear, and like Humpty Dumpty, you've got to figure out how to put this thing back together. And the most common scenario we see is people tell us, hey, when we initially set these applications up, we had an army of consultants. It was the company's #1 priority. I had all these resources, and it still took me 3 to 6 months to get this application really running. And now here I have this tape. I've got a pile of gear. I'm all by myself. I might have a friend or two with me from my team, but there's just no way we're going to bring this back in hours, much less days as the business expects. And do you even know how to do it, right? So where's all the documentation, and how current is it that's going to explain to you how to put this thing back together? You might have great documentation that talks about how to run it every day, but reassembling it from scratch, most people don't have that, or it's significantly dated. So the evolution out of that model for most companies is to do what we call frugal warm site. That's where you take your really expensive primary location with all your applications in it, and you don't want to go through that tape experience. Maybe you tried it, maybe you've heard stories, and it's not going to work. So you set up some form of a recovery location. We see a lot of people will do this in a remote office that they might have. Some people will actually leverage a local co-location facility or a data center, buy a cabinet, and they'll put some gear there. And typically what occurs is that equipment that's put in the colo site, because you're trying to be frugal and this is only for disaster, has really no resemblance to what you've got going in your production environment. And it could just be the smaller model, so you didn't want to put the full-blown big SAN out there because it's so expensive. So we got the junior model. It's got the same amount of capacity, but nowhere near the I/O. So guess what's going to happen in that model? You go to run production over there, and it's going to perform really horribly, probably to a point where you can't really even be effective with it. The other approach we see is people will take the equipment that they've got after an upgrade, and instead of sending it back to a hardware reseller or a refurbisher or using it for test and development, they'll actually box it up and move it over to a colo site and put it in there. And guess what? That production application that you were running into performance issues with that caused you to do the upgrade in the first place, do you really believe running that production equipment on the equipment it ran on 2 years ago that you replaced is going to be effective? Obviously not. And then the third version of this that I see is some people will do a storage-only play. So they will put some kind of replication technology in between the sites, and they'll just put a NAS out there. And it's sort of like a stretched backup model. And the idea, again, is you've got to get on the phone, call your favorite VAR, and beg and plead to have all the compute and network capacity and all the other resources shipped in overnight. And depending on how that goes, that could be a really lengthy process. And financially, you just really bought yourself a second data center, which, while you're trying to recover the environment, no one's going to complain about. But I guarantee 30 days later when they get the bill, that's going to be a problem, right? You're going to look kind of foolish. So the next evolution beyond that model is to go into more of a hot site approach. And this is where you're investing the same, if not really similar dollars in two locations. The way we see a lot of people do this to save some money, and if they have the means, and this is usually larger companies that have multiple buildings, maybe even multiple data centers on campus, or universities, they tend to have a lot of buildings all on the same campus. They've got dark fiber, all that kind of stuff. The challenge with that model, of course, is one event may affect both of your locations. So you spent $250,000 building a cluster in building 1, spent $250,000 putting an identical cluster in building 3. You probably spent $25,000, $50,000 buying the replication license to move the data back and forth between the two. And they're both on the same internet connection. They're both on the same power. They're both in the same floodplain, wind pattern, whatever it is. Both buildings are down. And then the final approach, this one's just, it's really awesome if you can afford it. I think about Ferris Bueller's Day Off and his description of driving a Ferrari. It's like, if you have the means, by all means do it. But most people don't. And even if they do, it might be for 1 or 2 applications in an environment where there are 40 or 50 that you have to support. So you're not able to really provide this experience for everything you do. So you take your hot site architecture, put 2 environments that are exactly identical. You get some really awesome technology from F5 networks, put it in front, load balances, all that. Same. It's kind of Google or eBay style. Pretty cool stuff. Challenge is, unless this is a massive revenue generator or it supports your core mission, if you're a software as a service company and this is your business, this probably makes a lot of sense. If it's just supporting your business, it's a huge distraction and expensive use of the capital you have and the talent to just provide availability for a single or 1 or 2 applications. So that's all great. So if that makes sense to me and it makes sense to you, what's the problem? Why don't we just fix it? Well, oftentimes, or the majority of times, IT is not in control of our own destiny when it comes to funding and prioritization. We have to go back to the business for that. And helping them understand all these risks and the challenges and the technology and the different choices you might have is not easy. And with all the change going on in the space, I could argue it's maybe even a little harder than ever. So we came up with the way. We think it's pretty creative. I've actually done this at about 30 events around the country. But we created a disaster recovery simulation. And the tool we use to do the simulation takes the form of a card game. And waiting for the screen to refresh here. because we have an awesome picture of the game. All right, well, I'll skip ahead to that. Or I'll try and agitate the WebEx here and see if I can make it go. There we go. All right. So we nicknamed the game Rockstar based on feedback we got from a lot of people that played the game. The reason that we use the word Rockstar is because it's one of the cards that's in the deck, and it's meant to describe you, the IT person that just has an amazing ability to, under duress, perform magic because of your skills and your talents. The typical way that this game is played, or we do these simulation exercises, is at events, or in some cases we've actually gone on site and facilitated this with the company directly to sort of help our champion, the IT person, manage the exercise with their leadership teams or their staff. So this is obviously, WebEx is not the most awesome way to try and do this, so we're trying to sort of play the game with you, and we'll run through a couple exercises here to give you a feel for how it works. And then if you let us know, let Ann know in the chat that you'd like to receive a copy of this, we'll happily send it out to you. And again, we're happy to help coach you through trying to run this exercise if you think it's valuable. So the elements of the exercise are, there's a couple different things. So clearly you start with an event, and what we've tried to do here is take around 10 different types of disaster events, whether it's high winds, fire, a hacker, et cetera, so on, and create some diversity in terms of the things that might actually happen in your world. And then depending on the application that it would affect, or the type of business you're in, you may have a direct revenue impact if you're e-commerce application, you may have a customer service impact, you may have a brand impact, there could be a regulatory or a legal impact, so we added some diversity in there as well. And then events happen at different levels of severity, so the scope of the impact in terms of the number of days it'll take you to recover affect that as well. So we have downtime cards. And then everybody has different assets. So this is one of the things, as you probably have peers at other organizations that are in IT, and clearly, some have generators, some have lots of staff, but no budget. Some people have lots of budget and not enough people. Everybody's got different resources they can use to try and manage an event. And then, as you can probably guess from my name, I'm an Irish guy, so I believe in Murphy's Law. And you can say the best laid plans of mice and men. No plan is good after the first shot is fired. There's lots of ways to look at it, but the key is that you go try to put this plan in play, you try to leverage your assets, and things don't always work out the way that you designed. So let's walk through one of these real quick. All right, so the event that we drew is a burnout. So you've actually got a fire in the data center, and not only is the fire potentially an issue, but the sprinkler system is going to deploy, and as we all know, water, electricity, and data centers don't mix very well. So the impact of the issue is basically the business says, if you don't have this resolved in 24 hours, we are going to ask you to update your LinkedIn profile to say you've had a status change and you're now no longer employed at the company. So that's pretty important. You want to be able to pay the mortgage and whatnot. Downtime, because of the scope of the event and the water being in the data center, looks like it's going to be 5 days. The assets that we have to work with were really expensive, and for certain situations they're pretty awesome, but unfortunately the ones that we have to work with here, a generator and redundant connectivity to the internet, are not going to help us with water in the data center. So unfortunately that's not going to work out very well. And what's really the salt in the wound for me on that is I have been part of the conversations where I remember begging and doing risk analysis and presenting architectures and options to try and get those big resources put in. When we didn't have a generator, we got a generator. Didn't have a UPS, we got UPS. Had only a single internet connection, it kept going down. We finally got redundant internet. So it's just really painful to see that those resources are out there, how much you probably invested getting those approved and funded and implemented, and that you're not protected in this case. So to make matters even worse, we go to try and deploy our DR plan, which isn't a really good one to start with in this case, but the documentation's out of date because we only tested it, the DR plan, when we initially set DR up, and that was a year and a half ago. And to help us, we had some vendors that we thought we could rely on, and we have no SLA with them. They're not 24/7 shops. So to try and get the sprinkler system repaired, or get the water out of the data center, get the electricity turned back on, these people, they may have on call, maybe not. We're having a hard time, so it's going to add even more delay. So we go from 5 days to around 8 or 9. So that's a physical event. So let's look at a logical event, logical disaster event. So call this card no YouTube, because that's the way, jokingly teasing end users, they think about the internet when, things like YouTube and CNN go away. But as most of you probably know, you've got some critical applications that depend on the internet, either to provide outside users access to it, or maybe the application requires the internet to function itself, and that has a business impact, that when your internet connection goes down, not only is YouTube impacted, but so is your business. Unfortunately, in this case, the company that we're modeling here, their brand is actually known for reliability and security, kind of more of a premium company, and the idea that their services would be unavailable is just kind of unfathomable. You think about, somebody like Google, a lot of their brand is the fact that you can go to Google anytime you want. And if it's not available for a couple days, people will use something else, and certainly won't think about your availability the way they did before. So we're dealing with 2 days of downtime, not as bad as 5, still pretty significant given the brand impact it's going to have on us. Good news is we've got a second site in this situation, so we were thinking a little bit ahead. Not sure what all is over at that second site. It might be, just some office space. It might be a co-location facility. It might be a second campus location. But we've got something that we can fail over to and try and resolve, get the applications back up faster. And, we've got awesome people. So we've got some rock stars on our IT team. It could happen at 3 in the morning. They're just going to show up and invest all their energy and talent in trying to resolve this. So that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, when we try to deploy over to our backup location, remember that we had a budget crunch when we were getting the funding approved. We were super excited just to get a second location approved, but the equipment didn't get approved, so we used some stuff that we had laying around the data center. We put that out there, and we go to try to get the application powered up and running. We had a gigabit internet connection at headquarters. We only have a 10 meg connection at the backup site because of the budget crunch, so we don't have the internet capacity we need. And the equipment's just not able to support the number of users that production could. Unfortunately, that's going to add multiple days to the outage while we work with our telco provider to get the internet upgraded very quickly. Not an easy change in most cases for them to make. Might be some equipment change involved. And I'm on the phone with CDW trying to order in more servers and a faster storage unit so I can run at production speed. All right, so let's talk about some companies that are doing this differently and taking a much more modern approach to recovery for specific applications. And as you could probably guess, these are all companies that have chosen to try and do this with us. So that's pretty cool. So F5 Networks, obviously the brand impact story, given that F5's brand is built on security and availability and performance. The idea that their public-facing applications, whether it's their website or Dev Central, their community portal, could be down. Pretty big issue for them. So what they've done is they actually have that application running both in our Vegas facility and in our Indy facility. They run replication between the two apps to ensure that the content is always up to date. and then they have all of their amazing F5 technology, all the appliances that they make and services that they build themselves are actually sitting in front of those applications and are able to nearly instantaneously redirect users from one location to the other if there's a outage or a hiccup in terms of availability, or if the performance is just a little better in Indy than Vegas today, they can move users back and forth. Pretty cool. So this is obviously a hot site approach in very modern effort using cloud to do it, and it runs really amazingly well. So most people don't have the means or the necessary skills and whatnot to do that for all applications. You might have a desire to do that or an aspiration from a mission critical standpoint. So we've created this worksheet to try and help you figure out, how many things do you have that are like what F5 is doing and need to be back online in minutes, if not seconds. But then also, what do you have that might be a more modest recovery requirement, and you'd be thrilled, the business would be thrilled if you could come back in hours instead of days. And then obviously there are other applications. Payroll is a good example. Super critical application, as I think all of us would agree. But if it goes down on a Tuesday, as long as it's back up by Friday and you can still print checks, I think other than HR, certainly the majority of the company would be pretty happy with that in the event of a really awful disaster. So let's walk into another scenario here. We're going to talk a little bit more about a malicious event. So in this case, we've got, I call it parting shot. So a former IT staff member comes back into the business through a back door and attacks one of the critical applications. Unfortunately, this person knew exactly where to hit us to make us feel the impact. They went after our e-commerce site on which we make about $100,000 in revenue per day. It's going to be down for 3 days, so they really scrambled up the data or deleted some stuff, whatever they did. Good news is we've got great vendor support, so we're working with a provider that's available 24/7, has people always on deck to take our calls or even come over and help us. And I've got recovery as a service, so I'm actually backing my application up into the cloud. And I can recover in hours instead of days because all the resources are there available for me. Challenge, unfortunately, situation's much worse than I thought. So initially I thought they only took out the e-commerce application. It turns out they wiped out all of our backups as well. So it seems like I'm going to be in there for a couple weeks because of the damage they did. They also dropped off a lot of Trojans and viruses while they were in there. So it's really just a mess. So I'm going to need to run in my DR environment for a couple weeks, and key staff member that I had is actually on vacation at the time that this all happened. So good news is I'm backed up in a recovery as a service environment, but I'm going to have to stay there a lot longer than I thought. So things like security, running backups, all those sort of ancillary things that people don't usually invest in a DR environment are missing. And those are going to be important to me because I'm going to be there for such a long period of time. So we'll talk about another company. So Goodwill of Indiana. Goodwill found themselves, a very traditional IT organization, they found themselves in the mission-critical application business when they built a customer-facing rewards card application. They actually were very concerned about the availability of that, and their data center and infrastructure was not designed to run sort of at eBay levels. So they are replicating that application to the Bluelock location out in Vegas, and they're able to recover in anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour or two based on testing that they've done, which greatly exceeded the capability that they have before and is totally appropriate for the availability they need to do for their rewards application. So now we're going to talk about another type of human event, but this is not the malicious kind, this is more the accidental kind. So some software events or software updates needed to be applied. We did testing, we did everything we possibly could to make sure that that would go well, but unfortunately it still broke our mission critical application. Unfortunately, we're in a transactional environment, so if you think about a pizza delivery site, if Papa John's isn't available and you've got to feed the soccer team after the big game, you're going to go down to dominoes, and that's exactly what's going to happen here. Is we're losing revenue, but we also have customers that are defecting over to a competitor because very commoditized business that we're in, and they can do that. Good news is we're only going to be dealing with about a day of downtime, so it's $100,000 impact, plus we're going to lose some customers, but certainly not like 4 or 5 or 9 days we're dealing with, or weeks we're dealing with other things. The backup tapes worked. That's great. So because the data's good, I can kind of undo the software update damage. I made a backup, maybe a snapshot even, right before we did the update, so I can try to deploy that back. And I've got some extra equipment laying around because our CEO, obviously, because of the business we're in, is very technology friendly, so they let us have equipment that we can lay around. So we're actually able to restore the application onto some spare equipment we have, and that just makes the process even faster. Unfortunately, we've never done this before, so or we've done it once. We tested it one time, felt like it worked, and we started to run into all these other problems that we didn't even envision. So license keys, man, who has license keys? And our software says, well, you can run the key in production, you can't run it in any additional location. So I'm on the phone trying to get a vendor to give me license keys. That's going to add a couple days to my problem. And the backup location that I chose, where I put the equipment out there, it's actually affected by the same issue. And you may think, well, how would a software update affect 2 different locations? Well, that replication that I set up to kind of keep those things up to date with each other, those software updates, as soon as they went wrong and broke my application, they were immediately replicated over to my backup site. So I've got 2 copies running of a broken application. So how do we move forward from that? If we dig a little deeper into the, what's underneath the covers, and this is the last section that we're going to run through. Really, you've got the model where you've got your data center, you've got your applications there. In a recovery as a service model, the only thing you're primarily paying for on the recovery side is the storage. And what that allows you to do is basically put a connection in place. You could use a private connection, VPN, raw internet, kind of any way that you can get to the backup site. You replicate the data over there. You're paying just for the storage. And then if you have a data center issue, all of that capacity, whether it's software licensing, CPU, RAM, network, disk I/O, is added on demand. That's kind of the magic of what goes on in a cloud environment. So if we fast forward and then you use that DR environment for 2 days and you're done, those costs all go away. Pretty cool. So let's go the distance here and dive into another customer scenario that we have, a company called Tire Discounters. They realized they're actually up to, I think, over 120 locations now, but they did a very large corporate expansion, and it made the applications that were running in their headquarters data center that supported their retail stores like point of sale and logistics even more critical because the company was getting so much larger. And the impact of those applications being down or disrupted would impact, the entire retail network that they had. So they had a DR consultant come in and say, hey, you should really try to recover that into a cloud environment. It's probably the most economical way for you to get DR, and it'll perform much faster than trying to do it all yourself. So that's what they did. So they have all the retail stores here. The applications under normal conditions are running at the headquarters office. We put what we call continuous data replication in between the 2 sites. That's what moves the data back and forth. It does that in real time. There are no snapshots, so the minute a piece of data changes in production, it gets written immediately over to the backup site. My builds are not running as quickly because we jumped all the way to Failback. So anyway, you log into the self-service console, or if you're not able to do that because you don't have network access due to the type of event, you can actually let a Bluelock person know, and we will, with your permission, we'll perform the failover for you. We log into the backup environment, hit the power up button. The resources automatically get added to your applications. We redirect the network traffic, and you're back up and running. We also support Failback. So if the event was a temporary phenomenon, maybe a power outage that only lasted for a day, you probably want to get that production application back into running in your production data center. So we just reverse the stream, so to speak, and we do the continuous data protection back to your location using the exact same technology. We just go in and say, instead of you are now the backup site and we're the source site, data gets replicated out there, and then when all the data is there during a planned event, we will actually fire production back up with you, make sure it works okay, and then we go back in the network and redirect the users. All right. And then obviously you probably want your DR back, so we log in and we reverse the streams again, establish Bluelock as the backup site, and then anything changing in production gets sent back out to DR just like it was before the event. So it's pretty cool. So obviously a lot of content we went through today, and one of the challenges with trying to stay at a high enough level but with enough detail is we're not going to satisfy everybody. So we actually have a number of other sessions that you can look in terms of webcasts if you're concerned about more of an overall strategy, if you're more on the technical side or the architecture and you want to dig into the details, or if you're thinking, man, this is really what I want to do, but I'm not sure we can afford it. Got a lot of other projects on the table. We've got some tools that help you budget. So those are all out there. The other thing that we found really valuable is training. So a lot of people have really no practical experience or knowledge with disaster recovery, even if they are the top IT architect in their organization or part of a really strong team. So we actually have a Raas certification program that we offer now, and we're actually going to open that up. We have a session coming up in September, and we have a few slots available that we decided we would just offer out to you folks. If you're interested, there's no cost for that. For the marketing, I would say, is covering the cost for that for you. So thank you to marketing. But Diane will tell us a little bit more about that. And then if you haven't already told Ann in the chat, we'd love to know how we did, and maybe did we drift too long on a subject, did we not go far enough, or any other questions that you might have.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Pat, for your time today and taking us through all those different scenarios. We have about 5 minutes left for questions, and we have quite a few to go through. So the first question we got is, do you have a continuous data protection mechanism available in the solution?
Yeah, we do, and I'm guessing that question probably came in before I went over the slides there. But continuous data protection, as I mentioned before, is a newer technology that's available, and what it does is it doesn't wait for snapshots. It doesn't try to back the data up every hour, every 24 hours, and then send it all over in a big pile, and that it has to be then assembled and reassembled when you do the recovery. We actually receive the data through continuous data protection. Any changes, so if you would save a PowerPoint file, if you would go in and edit a Word file, a new customer would register through your application and be recorded in your database, the minute that that data gets written to disk in your data center, it is immediately replicated out to Bluelock. So your, for DR terminology, your recovery point objective is usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 seconds, which is outstanding.
Great. You mentioned in the markets landscape slide not being able to locate where your data was hosted, where your data was when it was hosted in mega clouds. How does Bluelock solve that problem? Yeah,
so two ways. We actually tell you which data center you're in, and that's a big help. These are both lights-on data centers, so there are network operations staff there that can facilitate you. There is protocol you have to go through to visit, bring in your driver's license, things like that. But you are allowed to come to our data centers. There are people here to receive you, and we actually allow auditors to come in and have as much access to your specific resources as possible. So we have always, whether you're in healthcare, financial services, whatever, state and local government, we've always been able to meet and in, I think, all cases exceed the controls that those folks required.
Okay. When I actually get into recovery, how do I run in recovery and how long can I stay there?
Great question. So you can, there's sort of two issues here. One is just what running in recovery is like versus running in production. because there are some capabilities that production has that recovery does not, and then there's also a financial aspect to that. So the good news in both cases is from a financial perspective, we do bill based on a daily rate. So if you recover and you're here for 1 day, or you're here for 6 days or 20 days, you're just paying that day rate, and it doesn't change. There are no penalties because it's a recovery environment. It's our standard rates. Even though you're in a disaster, you're paying the same rate that you would if you were running a production application here. The other issue is that if you're going to be in a DR mode or a disaster mode for more than 24, 48 hours, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of things that people don't think about in terms of a disaster environment that are kind of fundamental in a production environment. The biggest one I can think of is making sure that you are running backups. So one of the things we allow people to do in our disaster recovery environment is you can actually go in and turn on backups. That's optional. They are not enabled by default. But once you've done the recovery, you log in the console and say, hey, I want to go ahead and run a backup every 24 hours, and I want to retain it for 30 days, 90 days, whatever your requirements are, and just like I did at home. We also, depending on other requirements you might have around performance, availability, or even if you needed to add disaster recovery, again, if you were going to be with us for 30 or 45 days and you need to DR even while you're at Bluelock, we can actually upgrade you from a DR virtual data center into a production virtual data center. And if you're still with me on this one, so you're in production now in Indy because we've upgraded you from a DR environment to production. We can then replicate your production environment out to Vegas. So if it's going to take you 30, 60, 90 days to sort of resolve your local situation, you're not vulnerable to a disaster that might occur, at one of our locations while you're in your recovery mode. All kinds of neat stuff that we can do there.
Great answer to the question. And that brings us right to 2 o'clock, so we're going to let everyone go for the day. If you have any follow-up questions or anything we didn't get to, we will follow up with you individually. If you're interested in trying for one of the slots marketing is covering for in the Raas certification workshop, please reach out to Anne via the chat tool, the Q&A, or the email that she provided throughout the presentation, and we will get you all the details on that as space is available, because those fill up fast. So thank you all for your time today. Look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, and let us know if you have any other questions. Thanks so much. Thanks,
yeah,
Pat.
Great. Thanks, guys.